Family recounts terror at hands of ATF agents. Answers sought for no arrest gun raid. Thursday, April 13, 1995. By Michael Hedges for The Washington Times. The hilltop home of gun show promoter Harry Lamplugh in the wooded central Pennsylvania town of Wellsboro was raided by several agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms last May. The encounter was a nightmare out of a Gestapo handbook, say Mr. Lamplugh and his wife, Teresa. Agents waved automatic weapons in their faces, damaged their property, took medical and family records, seized guns and $2,000 in cash, and even caused the death of pets. In court papers, the federal government has called the charges of harassment and brutality outrageous and utterly false. But no one in the Lamplugh family has been charged with a crime. And ATF doesn't dispute that at least $18,000 of the Lamplugh's property was seized and listed for forfeiture and that personal documents have not been returned. The couple and their attorney, Robert Sanders, have been unsuccessful in trying to open a court affidavit justifying the search and describing why the Lamplughs were being investigated. With federal income taxes due Monday, the Lamplughs have not regained any business records. Their story is achieving the status of underground classic among gun owners, pro-gun groups, and other anti-ATF organizations. The National Rifle Association's Ginny Simone has prepared a videotape on the case, and other organizations are telling their members about it. Beginning to rank with such cases as the ATF and FBI raids on the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas, in 1993, which left 96 sect members and 4 ATF agents dead, and the Randall Weaver case in Idaho, which began as a minor weapons case and ended with a federal agent and the wife and son of the white separatist dead. The Lamplugh case has become another rallying point in a growing protest over what gun groups say are unconstitutional assaults on their rights. In an interview, Mr. Lamplugh said the federal agents were on a fishing expedition. He thinks ATF was searching for records of people who sell guns through the 40 shows he promotes in the eastern United States each year, and for the names of the 70,000 members of the Borderline Gun Collectors Association, which his family runs. They want me to be a rat and do their dirty work, he said. I want no part of it. Another motive hinted at in court papers filed by the family in an effort to get property back, is political retaliation against Mr. Lamplugh for setting up gun shows at which cruel and personal criticism of the Clinton administration and ATF is exchanged. As part of the freedom to assemble, associate and exercise free speech, it is not uncommon to see prominently displayed posters and other media scorning and ridiculing political figures, and executive branch officials, the Lamplugh court brief says. At a typical gun show you will hear things like the president has committed cowardice and treason for protesting against America on foreign shores, Mr. Lamplugh said. Mr. Lamplugh, a 51-year-old Army veteran, was a licensed gun dealer, but gave up his license to promote gun shows held by groups such as the Lions Club, the American Cancer Society, the Marine Corps League, and the American Legion. He denied committing any crime to warrant the search and seizures. Common sense will tell you, if they had something on me, they would have filed charges a long time ago to shut me up, Mr. Lamplugh said. On May 25, he said, his family was visited by the full wrath of a powerful and angry group of federal agents. The first thing I saw was a guy running across the yard with a machine gun pointed at my son. If he would have tripped, he would have killed him, Mr. Lamplugh said. I had a guy put a machine gun, an MP5, in my face and tell me to shut up. I asked if he had a warrant, and he emphasized with his gun and his mouth that I better shut up or else. Over the next 8 hours, agents thrashed about the family home, at one point, pausing to have a pizza party, Mr. Lamplugh said. Private mail was opened and read, food was taken and eaten, and a hole was burned in the carpet by an agent's casually discarded cigarette, according to a brief filed in the couple's lawsuit to regain their property. Mr. Lamplugh is a cancer patient. Powerful prescription drugs were strewn on the floor, giving family pets a fatal snack, he said. and a female ATF agent kicked a kitten, then stomped it to death, the family said. The federal government denies the killing of the pets and other harassment. In a counter-motion to the Lamplugh suit, Assistant U.S. Attorney Wayne P. Samuelson said the search was conducted in a low-key, orderly, and professional manner. But a veterinarian has confirmed that the day of the search the Lamplughs brought him a kitten that had suffered blunt force trauma and soon died. Either this couple who loved animals killed their own kitten, or someone else did that day, said Mr. Sanders, the Lamplugh's attorney. Most of the weapons seized by federal agents were well-known models of hunting rifles and shotguns made by companies such as Winchester, Marlin, and Remington. They also took a few pistols. Commemorative World War I and World War II Colt .45s. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Central Pennsylvania refused to discuss the case this week, saying the raid was part of an ongoing investigation. In a briefing paper on the case yesterday, ATF in Washington said, as a convicted felon, Mr. Lamplugh is prohibited from lawfully possessing firearms. Mr. Lamplugh denied he is a convicted felon. I made a diligent search, Mr. Sanders said. I had an attorney search, and a private investigator who is a former ATF agent search, and I can find no record that Mr. Lamplugh was convicted of a felony. ATF refused to specify or produce records of any felony charges against Mr. Lamplugh. In court papers, Samuelson said, the specific alleged criminal violations were expressly made known to Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders said he was told his client was being investigated as a former felon who illegally owned guns and engaged in gun dealing without a license. Mr. Lamplugh said he has not sold guns since voluntarily giving up a gun seller's license a couple of years ago. The government ran an ad in USA Today to sell the $18,000 worth of guns taken from Mr. Lamplugh's private collection. He was not informed but happened to see the ad. To prevent the sale, he had to post a bond equal to the gun's value. More from a 1995 issue of Soldier of Fortune magazine. Lamplugh Raid, a new low in BATF terror tactics. By James L. Pate. Staring through steamy windows into the shadowy dusk outside her rural home, Teresa L. Lamplugh felt inexplicably spooked. A petite blonde, Lamplugh thought she saw a man crouched behind some shrubs outside, peering into her hot tub room. Pulling a towel around her as she sat upright on the edge of the churning whirlpool, she called out nervously to her husband. Harry C. Lamplugh came and looked. Probably just a deer, Harry reassured her. Wild game is plentiful around their north-central Pennsylvania home. As it turned out, though, the Lamplughs were the prey that night. They realized the next morning that a man had been peeping at Terry. That realization came not gradually, like the spring dawn, but with sudden terror of a vicious pit bull snapping its chain in mid-lunge. The Lamplughs remember the moment well, because it was the last time they felt safe in their home. It was 8:30 a.m., on May 25, 1994. About 15 or 20 gangbangers, as Harry calls them, descended on his home with weapons drawn, screaming obscenities and threatening their lives. 7 hours later, their house looked like a gang rumble had indeed gone down. Greasy boxes, half-eaten pizza slices and aluminum soda cans, the intruders stopped for lunch in the middle of their mayhem, were tossed on the floor. Disassembled tampons lay scattered in the bathroom. Terry's lingerie drawers were ransacked and dumped. Antique furniture and valuable statuary were broken. Cigarette butts had been flipped carelessly on the carpet, scorching it. Harry's vials of cancer medication, hundreds of dollars worth, were poured out and crushed underfoot. 2 of Terry's beloved cats ate part of the chemical mixture, then died in howling agony. As a final parting gesture, a kitten was stomped to death in the front yard as the Lamplughs watched. What gang of thugs would terrorize a home so? It was those foul-mouthed, trigger-happy stormtroopers of the BATF. The Lamplughs, owners of the Borderline Gun Collectors Association, are typical of many legitimate, family-owned businesses in the firearms industry being persecuted by the ATF, while real criminals go unpunished. 6 carloads of ATF agents, accompanied by at least 2 members of the Internal Revenue Service and 2 troopers from the Pennsylvania State Police, converged suddenly on the Lamplugh's residence. The couple's oldest son John, who lives a few miles away, had just finished turkey hunting on his dad's property and was stowing a shotgun in a truck when agents surrounded him, brandishing weapons. Harry Lamplugh said he believes if the agents had arrived a few moments earlier and seen John holding a weapon, they would have shot his son. Harry Lamplugh was in his pajama bottoms, drinking a cup of coffee, and his wife was in the bathroom, when the phalanx of agents entered from the front and rear. All were armed, only 2 wore clearly marked uniforms. When Lamplugh realized they were law enforcement agents, he asked for a search warrant. "Shut the fuck up, you motherfucker," shouted ATF agent Sealer, "you want more trouble than you've already got." Meanwhile, over at John Lamplugh's, the youngest brother, Bronson, a college student, was just getting up when agents burst in. He was searched at gunpoint and interrogated as to why he had more than $500 in cash in his possession. The incident so upset him that Bronson took a leave of absence from college and seldom visits home anymore. Back at the parents' home, the outrages continued. Fearing for their lives, the couple cooperated, voluntarily opening combination safes, lock boxes, and gun cabinets. Harry asked repeatedly for a search warrant. Agents said they didn't have to show him one until they left. He asked if he was under arrest and they said no. Yet the Lamplughs were held all day at gunpoint in their night clothes, much of the time at the breakfast table by a nervous young agent with a submachine gun pointed at their heads. They were not allowed to call their attorney or answer the phone, and could only go and use the bathroom with an armed guard. Only at the one point during the day-long ordeal did Harry Lamplugh get any inkling of what the intruders might be looking for, when one agent asked him about the location of an alleged machine gun. Lamplugh told the agent he'd never owned a fully automatic weapon. That he had once a Vietnam commemorative golden-laid semi-auto Thompson, but it had been sold. All the while, the agents continued to make what the Lamplugh's attorney, Robert E. Sanders, characterized in one federal court document as outrageous and extremely offensive remarks. At one point, the motion for return of property alleges, ATF Special Agent Sealer, referring to Lamplugh's business as a gun show promoter, wisecracked, "We don't mind you selling guns to niggers, because they are only killing each other." The eldest Lamplugh son, John, was finally told he was free to go. He asked for the currency, $2,000, that had been removed from his wallet and vehicle. "You'll have to fucking prove it's yours," IRS agent Bittenbender snapped. John Lamplugh left, poorer but wiser about the caliber of public servants his tax dollars employ. Inside, an agent removed $30 in cash and a grocery list from Terry Lamplugh's coat pocket. She could have the money back, the grinning agent sneered, if she could rattle off the serial numbers for the bills. Finding candy bars on the Lamplugh's dresser, agents ate them, tossing the wrappers. Harry had ordered a new truck, which he was scheduled to pick up that morning. The paperwork and $10,000 in cash were in an envelope on the dresser. It was all confiscated. Bittenbender found $1,500 Terry had squirreled away for cosmetic surgery in her pantyhose drawer. When she complained it wasn't right for them to take the money, he threatened her, "We'll see how cooperative you are when we throw you in a cell full of lesbians." When the agents left, the Lamplughs clutched each other and stared out the window terrified. As they watched in horror, Special Agent Donna J. Slusser paused in the yard by a Manx kitten, which bounded playfully at her feet. Slusser looked back at the Lamplughs, then turned and stomped the pet several times, kicking it into the nearby shrubbery. The kitten died from ruptured organs, a veterinarian autopsy revealed. Inside, all sorts of jewelry, and some valuable watches were taken, some still new in the box, some of which did not show up on the ATF seized property list. Personal mail was opened and taken, along with miscellaneous paperwork, including certificates of authenticity for firearms and other valuable collectibles, pet registrations, vehicle titles, insurance policies, wills, a marriage license, birth and baptismal certificates, adoption papers, Harry's Me. Literary service record, he's a Vietnam vet, and vital medical documents. Also seized were 61 firearms with an appraised value of $15,016, plus more than $20,000 in cash. Agents additionally confiscated records of Borderline Gun Collectors Association, the largest gun show promotion business in the northeastern U.S. Without this paperwork, it has been extremely difficult for the Lamplughs to pursue their livelihood. Seized business records included names and addresses of about 70,000 past and present members, from all 50 states and several foreign countries, as well as names and addresses of more than 600 advertising contacts and all contracts for future gun shows through the year 2000. Sanders, a retired head of ATF's law enforcement operations who now specializes in gun law, thinks the IRS may have been the primary agency pushing the raid, and the ATF helped out because the IRS could not develop probable cause. Sanders feels allegations of an illegal weapon were trumped up as an excuse as probable cause for ATF. The whole raid and seizures amount to a fishing expedition, he said. The first objective was for all these financial records, so the IRS can attempt to make some kind of a case against Lamplugh, Sanders told Soldier of Fortune. The second objective was obviously to seize all the names and addresses of the people who participated in the gun shows, who belong to the association and who attend gun shows. I can't think of any good purpose for this. All of these people are exercising their constitutional right to assemble, to speak with people who have common interests. I can't think of any legitimate reason why ATF would want that kind of information. This is the very type of thing that the 1968 Gun Control Act went overboard to prevent. ATF is not supposed to keep records of any firearms transactions. Aside from its vulgar and barbaric aspects, the Lamplugh's case is illustrative of an apparent trend in ATF cases in other key respects. First, as in the John Lawmaster case, the Lamplugh search warrant affidavit remained sealed 11 months after the raid, ostensibly to protect a confidential source, but more likely to hide the fact that the flimsiest pretexts were used to meet probable cause. In the Lamplugh case, when Sanders filed a motion to unseal the affidavit, his motion was then sealed by the court. I was never notified by the court that my motion was sealed, he said. Sealing warrant affidavits is routinely abused, Sanders said. There should be a real need, generally, prior to the execution of a search warrant, there's a good purpose, to prevent the destruction of evidence before they get there with a warrant. After the warrant is served, the reason they always give is to protect their source. But that's not a good reason. That doesn't override the constitutional guarantee to know your accuser. Second, as in the Louis Katona case, more on him later, extensive amounts of property were seized without criminal charges being filed. In the Lamplugh case, much of that property is apparently unrelated to anything in the search warrant. In all such cases, if the owner doesn't have a $2,500 bond to file with the feds to fight the forfeiture, he loses the property, no questions asked. Third, in the case of gun dealers and gun show promoters such as the Lamplughs, the search is a convenient excuse to copy records that the 1968 Gun Control Act clearly states are the property of the owner. It's all part of an apparently illegal campaign by ATF to compile a computerized database of gun owners, gun buyers, and gun dealers in a de facto gun registration effort, all the while conveniently ignoring the fact that criminals almost never buy or sell guns legally. The ATF's new firearms tracing center in West Virginia is de facto gun registration, Sanders said. No one outside the ATF really knows what they're doing at that center. The only thing that they can be doing is entering all the information that is obtained from business records, that is de facto gun registration. This type of activity, in general, bolsters the long-standing criticism that the ATF has an institutional bias against private gun ownership, to the extent that ATF more often ignores real criminals, to try to turn law-abiding gun owners into criminal statistics. "I think citizens are helpless," he said, matter-of-factly. "It's going to take congressional action. It's going to take strong oversight and massive changes in ATF management." Meanwhile, the Lamplughs wage their personal war against injustice by surviving, trying to keep their business going so they can continue to generate the money needed to wage their legal battle. Harry has been twice called to a federal grand jury, Terry once. Both have been forced to submit fingerprints, sit for photographs and submit handwriting samples. As of this writing in April, neither have been charged. As always, ATF investigators continue to play dirty. At least 4 grand jury witnesses told statements read to the grand jury were not the same statements they gave ATF agents about the Lamplugh case. One witness who gave permission to use his name, Tommy Griffith, said ATF agents tried to intimidate him prior to his testimony to change his statement, and tried to coach him on what to say. "Mr. Sealer didn't want to show me his identification card," Griffith said. "He told me he was the one who stuck a machine gun in Harry's mouth. Scott and he served me my subpoena. They told me perjury was a federal offense, that if I stuck with my story that I could go to jail. I wasn't telling them what they wanted to hear, which was the truth, so they were trying to intimidate me. Andy wanted me and him and the United States Attorney to sit down and discuss my testimony before going to the grand jury. I told them the only people I was talking to were the ones on the grand jury. Even if the worst is over, and the Lamplughs aren't sure that it is, they continue to live in fear of the terror tactics still wielded anonymously against them. They're not sure who the perpetrators are, but they have a pretty good idea. Much of the harassment has been over the phone. One caller told Terry Lamplugh that she has really nice pantyhose, but you don't have any tits. Right after an appearance on the G. Gordon Liddy show, a 0300 call warned them, "Don't fuck with the feds. You people have to learn to button your lips or else you're dead." The telephone threats are easy to cope with compared to knowing Terry Lamplugh has been stalked and harassed by people she is certain are either federal agents or their informants. She found one man in her yard, rummaging through her sports car. When she faced him with a handgun, he left and she followed. The prowler drove up next to a white Ford Bronco with US government plates, and then the two drove off together. The most terrifying incident, though, happened October 11, 1994, almost 5 months after the raid. Terry was running errands, and as she returned to her van, she noticed a scruffy-looking man who, she said, appeared to be drunk. She drove on to the drugstore and hospital to get cancer medicine for Harry. When she came out, she saw the same seedy man, leaning against a wall smoking a cigarette. When she opened the door and started to get in, the man suddenly appeared at her elbow. "Don't fuck with the bureau," he growled softly in her ear as she whirled around, startled. He spun on his heel, she said, and called over his shoulder as he hurried away, "Check out what's in your van." She jumped inside, slammed and locked the door and began to scream and tremble with rage. Then she steeled herself, deciding it was only another case of cheap intimidation. She could take it, she couldn't wait to get home and tell Harry. She was just about there, bumping up the rutted dirt road when, as she wheeled into the driveway, her grocery bags overturned. Tumbling limply out onto the floor next to her bucket seat was a dead black cat with a broken neck. What were the feds actually there for, though? Let's take a look at the actual court case that happened well after these events. This is a substantially shortened version. You can find a link to the whole thing in the description. On June 29, 1995, the grand jury for the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania returned a 21-count indictment, accusing Mrs. Lamplugh, her husband, and her stepson, of firearms-related offenses. On April 16, 1997, the grand jury returned a superseding 25-count indictment. Counts 24 and 25 charged Mrs. Lamplugh and her husband with the willful failure to file federal income tax returns for 1991 and 1992, in violation of some dumbass law. Remember, Mr. Lamplugh had cancer. He probably didn't give a shit about his taxes at the time. The defendants moved to sever the felon in possession counts. The district court granted the motion and ordered that the matter proceed in a bifurcated trial, with the tax charges to be tried first. Mr. Ellen Bogan represented Mrs. Lamplugh at trial. Mr. Lamplugh was represented by Robert Sanders. On October 29, 1998, 4 days before the trial was scheduled to begin and 4.5 years after the IRS and BATF searched the Lamplugh's house pursuant to a warrant, Mr. and Mrs. Lamplugh delivered a box of documents to their attorneys. The Lamplughs told their attorneys that the BATF and IRS had overlooked the box during a search of their residence, and that they had only just found the box. The box contained what appeared to be copies of some of the Lamplugh's 1991 and 1992 tax returns and financial records, the disclosed documents. Mr. Ellen Bogan informed the defendants that in order to use these documents at trial, he would be required to turn copies over to the prosecutor pursuant to Rule 16 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. The Lamplughs and their attorneys agreed that if the government introduced the documents at trial, Mrs. Lamplugh could preserve her credibility for the second phase of the trial by avoiding having to testify regarding the tax charges. To reiterate, this raid, the seizure of property, the upturning of the lives of a cancer patient veteran, the gun pointed into a teenager's face, was all over taxes. All over income taxes not filed by a man who was dying from cancer. A letter to Mr. Lamplugh could have accomplished just as much without involving the large amount of trauma inflicted on the family. Mr. Lamplugh later passed away on June 15, 1999, at the age of 55. Now, onto the Louis Katona case. The one that may have resulted in the death of an unborn child. Legend in the Making, by Eric Larson. For Time Magazine. Sunday, June 24, 2001. It has become the quickest way to fame in America's gun culture. And one morning in May 1992 it happened to Louis Katona III, a Bucyrus, Ohio, real estate salesman and part-time police officer. He got to tell all about it when the National Rifle Association flew him to its annual meeting in Phoenix last spring, how agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the jackbooted fascists of NRA lore, had raided his home and seized his machine gun collection. At the time, he estimated the gun's value at about $300,000 and kept them locked inside a walk-in vault in his basement, expecting them one day to pay for the college educations of his son and his second child, whose birth he expected in 7 months. One version of what happened next appeared in a recent full-page NRA advertisement, when shouting and cursing ATF agents rushed into his home to seize his firearms collection. They grabbed his pregnant wife Kim and shoved her into a wall. Within days she suffered a miscarriage. The Katona episode is one of the most vivid horror stories the NRA has been telling lately in its campaign to pillory the ATF. In a lawsuit now pending in Cleveland federal court, the Katonas are charging the ATF with the death of their unborn child and other offenses. But there's much more, or ultimately less, to this story than the NRA would have people understand. What prompted the raid was Katona's arsenal of machine guns. Under the National Firearms Act of 1934, anyone hoping to buy a machine gun must first fill out a federal authorization and have it signed by the chief law enforcement officer of the community. Until September 1988, Katona was an auxiliary Bucyrus police officer and took his forms to his boss, Chief Joseph Barron, an immense, bearded man with a shaved head and a passion for Harley-Davidson motorcycles. At one point, Katona claims, the chief pre-signed a large stack of forms. Barron denies it. During the summer of 1988, their relationship decayed. The department demanded that Katona turn in an old Bucyrus police chief's badge that his father had bought for him at a gun show. The department claimed it had been stolen long ago from another collector. When Katona refused, he was forced to resign. Meanwhile, Crawford County Sheriff Ronnie Schaber had persuaded almost all the county's police chiefs to agree to a moratorium on authorizing machine gun purchases. Barron agreed. In August 1989 he wrote to Katona, "Dear Lewis, I'm sorry, but I am not signing these forms any longer." Over the next 2 years, however, Katona kept buying machine guns and submitting the required forms to ATF, all apparently bearing the chief's signature. In choosing the targets of its investigations, the ATF relies heavily on tips from local police. In March 1991 the Cleveland office of ATF got a call from Sheriff Schaber, who had come to suspect, erroneously, that out-of-towners were buying machine guns from Louis Katona's father, Louis Katona Jr., a licensed dealer, and then listing false local addresses on their registration forms. The ATF waited almost a year before dispatching Compliance Inspector Thomas Scofies to check the elder Katona's records. In the process he stumbled across records of the son's purchases and quickly became suspicious, according to an ATF affidavit. He showed Barron a form with the chief's own signature, but Barron said he could not have signed it, he had honored the moratorium. Scofies alerted ATF's Cleveland office. Soon afterward, Special Agent Lance Kimmel met with Barron and showed him more forms bearing his signature but dated after his letter to Katona. The chief denied signing them. In a deposition, Kimmel said, "I had all the probable cause in the world to believe that the firearms had been transferred illegally, and there had been a mass forgery of documents that took place." A federal magistrate agreed and on May 7, 1992, authorized a search warrant. In contrast with a recent NRA ad that showed a photograph of ATF agents in battle gear rushing toward the reader, the raiding party that stormed Bucyrus the next morning consisted of 3 ATF agents, one in a suit, the rest casually dressed. No one brandished any weapons. As a matter of protocol, they invited Bucyrus police officer Jerry Agee to come along. While Agee and Special Agent Stephen Wells waited outside Katona's house, Agent Kimmel and Group Supervisor Stephen St. Pierre went to Katona's office and waited for him to return from an errand. They told him they had a warrant to search his house. As the search began, according to Officer Agee, Katona offered the raiders coffee and pop. Katona charges that Kimmel handled the guns roughly. He started holding the guns one at a time up to his belt level and turning to me and giving me a little sneer and dropping them one at a time on the concrete, Katona stated in a deposition. Officer Agee told ATF Internal Affairs investigators the height was more like 3 to 6 inches. Agent Wells said he and his colleagues took good care of the guns. But the most infamous moment came midway through the search when Katona's pregnant wife Kimberly arrived, furious at the intrusion and embarrassed that the agents would see her laundry room. Seconds later, the Katonas say, ATF Supervisor St. Pierre grabbed Kimberly and slammed her against a wall, shouting, "Get this woman the hell out of here." But Agent Agee and lawyer James Pry both said the agents did not handle Mrs. Katona roughly. She began bleeding that night, the Katonas charge, the beginning of a miscarriage. 10 days later she underwent a pelvic ultrasound examination, but medical records obtained by time show this exam yielded an unexpected discovery, an intrauterine gestational sac without embryonic echoes, suggesting a blighted ovum. 3 specialists, asked by time to review Kimberly Katona's records, agree in their conclusion, she had lost her baby well before the raid even began. The sac was empty, but her body had continued to develop as if the pregnancy were viable. Says Elon T. Moore, head of Columbia University's Obstetrics Gynecology Ultrasound Unit, that bleeding would have come sooner or later anyway, whether there had been a raid or not. ATF won an indictment against Katona, but handwriting experts for both sides agreed they had found no conclusive evidence linking the alleged forgeries to Katona or anyone else. As a result, the judge dismissed the case. Kimberly Katona, in a tear-filled deposition, said the agents didn't have to raid the house but could simply have asked Katona to explain how he got the signatures on the forms. ATF Director John Magaw agrees, saying the agents should have asked themselves some questions first. What is this we're trying to enforce? What is the danger to the public here? He adds, we're going to work a case like this differently in the future. But Sheriff Shaver wonders why the case got tagged as an example of federal abuse in the first place. It just baffles me, he says. Because it would appear to me that there was something going on there. There were forged documents. Sheriff Shaver doesn't seem to place that the documents were forged by the Chief Law Enforcement Officer Barron himself, when he blanket signed a large number of forms for Mr. Katona. It isn't very likely that Officer Barron ever received any kind of punishment or harassment from the feds, since he had complied with the hiatus on signatures for the legal transfers of machine guns. Whether or not Mrs. Katona's miscarriage had already happened is irrelevant. Pregnant women need to be treated gently, regardless of circumstance. So all of this, and who knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted, it was determined that nothing illegal had actually happened. Fucking scumbags. What you think veterans drive to defend your freedom. Versus what veterans actually drive to defend your freedom.